At that time, we were just beginning to have copy machines.
Wow.
That's why they could do the underground newspaper. Because copy machines had just become available. That was just all coming out of the woodwork in 1978.
Okay.
And then, although the election stopped, so Shimingda, he drafted a statement calling for the end of martial law, the withdrawal.
Wow.
Yes, that's the big thing. The end of martial law, withdrawal of security units from schools, military, basically dismantling the security apparatus. Freedom of speech, like 10 big demands. It's like the 10 Commandments. I think there were 10 items.
Wow.
And then he got all the candidates who would dare to sign on to it. That was Christmas Day, 1978. So right after the U.S. announced the breaking in relations. So it was tremendously fearful that everybody who signed was afraid this was the end of the rope.
You're listening to Talking Taiwan with your host, Felicia Lin.
We sat down to interview Dr. Linda Gail Arrigo. Linda. Linda talked about the era and events that precipitated the Kaohsiung Incident, which is widely considered the watershed moment in history that led to Taiwan's democratization. During this interview, Linda talked about how in 1975 she had been sent to observe a trial that had been stated to be an open trial, but when she arrived there, she saw that it wasn't. In the face of intimidation by the Taiwan Garrison Command officers, she chose to speak up about the injustice that she saw and reported it to Amnesty International. To me, Linda's self-directed action was a moment of defiant courage. Thank you, Linda Gail Arrigo. Linda, for sharing your story and for advocating for the people of Taiwan. We're here in Taipei, Taiwan, for Talking Taiwan on our election tour, and we have Linda Arrigo here.
Well, I'm really known by my Chinese name, Linda.
Yes. What initially brought you to Taiwan in the first place?
Okay, I'll try to cover that quickly, but my father was with Taiwan's defense system in the 1950s. Okay, so he was with the American Military Assistance Advisory Group in Taiwan from 1958 to 1961. And that was after he was sent to Korea and the Japan occupation, and then he came to Taiwan. And I didn't know he had a girlfriend in Taiwan, Miss Saigon situation. When I came with my father in 1963, he said we were just going to come for the summer, but we stayed. And I stayed for 5 years, that time as a teenager. So I was 14 to almost 19.
How would you describe Taiwan was like at that time?
I tell you, at that time, I would never have dreamed that there would be big hotels and all these cars on the streets. It was basically an agricultural country, but a fairly prosperous agricultural country. And you could see just the beginning of some business interests growing. It was very military. I think that's, as an American coming, aside from the heat, humid heat and the rice fields, you would really notice the military presence all over the center of Taipei. Military police, they'd have double 10 parade with tanks rolling down the streets in all the major streets. It was, rattling, deafening, and the huge, shrill anti-communist propaganda. So it was pretty scary just on that aspect of it. But other than that, it was a beautiful green country.
Wow, that's quite a sight to imagine right now, like the tanks rolling down the street.
Yes. So I came in June of 1963 and stayed till June of 1968.
Oh, 5 years.
And then that I went back to the States with my first husband-to-be. So my first husband was native Taiwanese, and that was really a choice on my part. Although my father's friends in Taiwan when I first came were all military, either ROC military or American military, and mainlanders, because in Taipei at that time, you could really tell the difference between mainlanders and Taiwanese.
Right.
And my father's girlfriend, later his wife, was mainlander from Shanghai.
I see.
So there's this really heavy Chinese presence. Chiang Kai-shek spoke Shanghai dialect. We didn't hear from him very often, but you would hear all these strange dialects of Mandarin every time you went to a government office. And my Mandarin picked up pretty quickly. I had learned Mandarin before I came, but it picked up pretty quickly. And then I also could see these cultural differences and the ethnic differences between the mainlanders and the Taiwanese. So I saw that pretty clearly within a year or so. And as I say, at that time, it was clear that the bosses, the government officials, the bureaucrats, the military were mainlander, all commanded by the military. And that the ordinary people, the farmers, the people in the market were all Taiwanese, speaking a totally different language. You know, it was pretty obvious, much more than it is now. And then I really decided I wanted to be with Taiwanese people.
Right.
But I felt they were, you know, like genuine, real,
Yes.
close to the earth, and did not have this paranoia. The mainlanders were quite paranoid, as even now you see. But in those days, they were really paranoid. The Chinese are going to come and kill us. That's a quick explanation.
Yeah.
But I went to school with the daughters of Claire Chenault, you know, the flying tiger. Claire Chenault. And his daughter was also named Claire.
Yeah.
And when she came over to my house for any extended period, her mother would go frantic and saying she's going to be kidnapped by the communists.
Oh, my goodness.
You know, so it was, her mother is later famous in the Watergate period, right, with Nixon. And of course, these are the people who then made friends with Communist China, as we know, who became pro-Communist China. But in those days, they were shrill anti-communist, and anybody who opposes the Chiang government, you're off with their heads, you're terrorists,
And
no
so-
democracy.
And so you married a Taiwanese and you went back to the United States. And then what
Right.
brought you back to Taiwan later?
Well, actually, we went to the United States, eloped, and then we got married at my mother's place. But then I was very much into Taiwan culture by that time. And we participated in the Taiwanese American groups in the Bay Area, which were very, very active, very adamant about Taiwan identity in the San Francisco area. And that one in particular was called 协之会. Taiwan 协之会, Taiwan Alliance for Interculture. So to give a real story to it, Kang Ning-xiang, the famous politician Kang Ning-xiang, was their guest in early 1975. And me and my husband took him to Chinatown and took him around Taipei. And then when we went back to Taiwan for the first time in 1975, I went into my father-in-law's front room and Kang Ning-xiang was sitting there.
Oh.
Okay, so he was actually a good friend of Kang Ning-xiang in the Wanhua area. Their family was from this old district of Taipei where the Longshan Temple is, from the Wanhua area. And then Kang Ning-xiang had just started up the magazine Taiwan Political Review. And I must say, by that time, I knew all the background of 228 and all those kind of things that Taiwanese Americans will tell you about. But you won't learn. In those days, you would never hear a word of it.
Yes.
You'd never hear a word of it in Taiwan. You would just feel this sense of terror, a sense of like frightened silence on any kind of political issues. But anyway, so it was loosening up a little bit. Kang Ning-xiang had started Taiwan Political Review, and he told me that since I was going to be doing research on girl factory workers, he would send his reporter, Chen Ju, who is now the head of the Control Yuan, right? Here we are 60 years later. Okay, this 1975. So he sent Sunju to my factory girl research site, and she participated in a little of my questioning of the factory girls, and I got to know her. And then she's a gadfly. She's an incredible gadfly. And then she took me to meet all kinds of other political prisoners, dissidents, intellectuals, social research people, women's movement people, like, I don't know, in the space of like 2 weeks.
Were you working on some kind of a degree in women's studies or this area?
Okay, my first husband and I had moved to the Stanford University area because I'd been admitted to the Department of Anthropology at Stanford University, which was quite famous for its early research on Taiwan. Arthur Wolf. So he was very happy at first to have a student who already spoke Chinese, who was already familiar with Taiwan, and was actually from, the man I was married to was from the area of his fieldwork, Sanxia. So they were very happy when I first went to the department. And then when I began to get involved with the dissidents, they were not so happy, including, I think, my Professor Wolf was concerned that he would get stomped on by the authorities. And there were also several other graduate students doing research in Taiwan. So my project was chosen for me, actually, by Arthur Wolf, and it was how to study the rapid family change in Taiwan as women became employed in the new electronics factories. And with the export industry, also the textile factories. But then the big labor-intensive area was the electronics factories. So it just happened that my father had been good friends with a priest in the south side of Taipei named Father Wanyak, and I was also a good friend with him. I'd helped him when he opened up his church, and then he built a dormitory for over 800 factory girls.
Oh.
So I had an in right from the beginning with Father Wanyak for a location to study the factory girls who were working at the new electronics factory, which was called Tongyong. So the English was General Instruments Taiwan, was the first big electronics factory in Taiwan, and that was my field site, pretty close to the dormitory. So that's when I was starting my field work in 1975.
So did you learn anything surprising or interesting about how these women's lives changed at all?
Well, yeah, no, that was quite fascinating. I could talk about it at great length. It was a big deal for women, especially young women, to be earning a cash wage.
So that must have been quite liberating. Like, do you think that led to any kind of women's rights movement at all?
It's a little more complicated than that because coming out of the traditional society where obviously sons were favored over daughters, basically, families would take the earnings of their daughters and invest it in the education for the sons. And then at those days, girls would be kicked out of the family. Kicked out, they were ushered out, like you're not supposed to come home after marriage age. So there were a lot of girls who were not married, who stayed working in the factories, but their families did not want them to come home. There's a very uneasy kind of period there where the family is pretty strictly patrilineal, but the families did want the money that the girls earned. So an uneasy kind of accommodation where some girls started putting away some of their money for their own studies.
Yes.
Some of the girls I interviewed, it was quite sad, were not welcome to go back to their own families.
Yeah.
And they felt abandoned.
Yeah.
And then there were other girls who thought they had good marriage prospects and met a guy who sweet-talked to them, and then they got pregnant and found out the guy's married. And this was quite typical for the technicians in the factories, that the technicians in the factories could take advantage of the girls. Because, I mean, the factories are like 90% young women.
Oh.
You know, it's like 9-to-1 ratio at least.
I see.
But then, because I was coming out of the anti-American presence in Vietnam, the protest against the Vietnam War in the States coming out of that background. So I looked more closely at the electronics factories in Taiwan, the mostly American-owned, and I found out that they had very close relations with the government's control of labor under martial law. I wrote a big article on this. So basically they were taking advantage of cheap Taiwan labor, which under martial law was not allowed to strike, was not allowed even to know all about the labor laws, and was quite regularly in a situation of being exploited with very unfair work conditions. Like they would lose 20% of their salary if they were 5 minutes late, things like that.
Wow.
Yeah, and that caused girls to jump off trains. I mean, I did know a girl who jumped off a train who was so afraid of being late for 5 minutes because she slept over. You know, she was like 2 years mentally impeded because she got such a serious concussion.
Wow.
And that was not the only case either. So they were under such
highly stressful, oppressive conditions.
Labor regime. I must say they did get some considerable freedom. Sometimes they lived in better conditions in the nice factory dormitory where I was, as compared to a lot of other factory dormitories. The electronics factories were a little better than the textile factories. But it's still definitely a situation in which the American managers are kept captive by the KMT middle level of managers who really control the conditions for the workers. And there were political control mechanisms in the factories also, where you could be accused of being a communist spy.
I asked Linda if her research got her in trouble with her advisor.
I hadn't published it then. I did publish it later, but I'd say it's rather that Canju got me into more trouble than I got into myself later. Canju took me to meet the Taiwan Political Review dissidents. And basically, after I met some of them, and I met Professor Chen Gu-ying, who was really pretty directly smuggling information out of the country and grooming some American students to help in this. So 1975 was the first time in August that he sent me, and I tried to attend a political trial, which was stated to be an open trial.
Okay.
And that's the end of my summer of fieldwork in 1975. So this was a big transition for me because it's the first time I actually appeared at the Taiwan Garrison Command.
Yes.
Yeah, and and actually, looked all those people in the face. And then I found that although they had announced that the trial would be open, it was not. And there were a lot of other foreign reporters who had shown up, and also an Amnesty International guy, James Seymour. He didn't quite make it in time for the trial, but he was waiting to get in. And then I found they had their name badges covered with tape. So I thought, what are you guys trying to hide? Why are you worried about having...
Wait, so did they, because since you said it was stated to be open, but it wasn't, so were all these foreign journalists allowed to observe?
They had a reception area, they had a reception room, and they kept us there. And I spoke Chinese much better than the journalists, so I started translating for them. And then there were a lot of the relatives of the prisoners also there in the reception room who weren't allowed to go in. So I started translating for the reporters to hear what the relatives were saying.
Oh, wow.
And then the Taiwan Garrison Command, they weren't happy, but they were standing around with the names taped over. You knew that they didn't want to be quoted, that they wouldn't let us talk, right?
Yeah.
But I did. I got the names of the people on trial. I got the responses of the relatives saying that they weren't allowed to have lawyers. And then I later gave all this information to the Amnesty International representative who wasn't able to make it quite on time. That was Jim Seymour.
Wow.
And the first time I met Jim Seymour. It was quite a big introduction to the martial law conditions.
A lot of people in your position would not necessarily go to that length to pass this information to Amnesty International. Yeah, what's the motivation?
Well, I can't go on it too long, but the fact that I was in Taiwan at a very young age and saw all this military presence, but at a Taipei American school I had access to things like the Fairbanks materials, which were considered seditious in Taiwan. Fairbanks is just an American historian, but of course he said why Chiang Kai-shek lost the Civil War was because he was corrupt, right? He was considered anathema. You weren't allowed to read Fairbanks, but I was able to read Fairbanks at Taipei American School. And so where did I get this motivation? I think I have to say one thing in this and that. When I was in the States with my husband and my son and watching all this reporting on the Vietnam War on TV, and the reporters talking about the body count under this regime supported by the United States, the Republic of Vietnam. And I could see the bodies on the ground, either on TV or on other pictures. And to me, I said, this looks like my husband. This looks like my child. And I'd been in Taiwan for enough time already to feel a real connection. And I can't quite say that's my only motivation, but it's something between that identification with the people, plus the fact that it's my government. As an American, of course, I'm Italian descent, American. My father served in World War II, and then Japan, Korea. But it's my government that is supporting this bloody dictatorship. So I felt a real drive. And the other aspect of it is being a graduate student in anthropology and sociology. I had this incredible curiosity. I had this overwhelming kind of curiosity that if I want to understand how this society is run and how it's kept together, I have to go where the crunch is. I have to go where the coercion is.
Yes.
So it was an emotional drive, but it was also a real intellectual drive on my part that I wanted to understand what's going on.
Yeah. And so what happened when you passed that information to Amnesty? Did Amnesty do anything?
I don't think I really knew right away then, because that was 1975. I have to say it's more what the effect on me was, but that was a very famous trial, the trial of Xie Congming, where actually under international pressure, his sentence was reduced.
And what was he on trial for?
He was on trial for bombing the American Information Center in Tainan and the Bank of America, which was all trumped up. It was all As far as I know now, because now I know many other people in the case, it was a way to make up charges that he could be jailed again. Now, if you know Xie Zhongming, Po Mingming, and Wei Tingcao are the famous three who issued the Taiwan Statement of Self-Redemption. Well, it was a self-saving statement in which they didn't actually even directly call for Taiwan independence, but they called for the right of the people of Taiwan to have democracy in 1964, and they were all jailed and put away. So this was after they had been released with some international pressure. Then this bombing case was an excuse to arrest Wei Tingcao and Xie Zhongming and about a dozen others. Po Mingming had escaped in 1970, right? There was a big upsweep among Taiwanese overseas. Xie Zhongming had done something else very important. He had made up a list of political prisoners, which had been disseminated and proved Taiwan had political prisoners. So probably this case against him with the trumped-up bombing thing was revenge, because he transmitted the list out. Basically, it was done with the help of a lot of people I knew later, Japanese Miyake and Lynn Miles that I worked with later.
There's some kind of connection between Chenju and the Kaohsiung Incident, right?
Yeah, there's quite a connection.
Yeah.
So the 1975 field work, that period when I was in Taiwan, was a real turning point for me,
Right.
both intellectually and in terms of my life purpose.
Yeah.
Pretty much, I went back and threw myself much more into a radical environment. Didn't pay much attention to my professors at Stanford, and I got thrown out of the department. And then I nicely left my first husband.
Oh, okay.
Because he said he couldn't stand for me to be gone for so long.
Oh.
And I was planning on going back to Taiwan and then finishing my research. I really had the next phase of my research.
So he stayed in the U.S.?
He stayed in the U.S.,
he didn't come back to Taiwan with you?
But I really did intend to join up with the democratic movement, even though I didn't totally know what was happening, but I knew there was some kind of rise.
You were being introduced to all these dissidents by Chenju, so you had some inkling of what was going on. Yeah.
Right, in 1975. But then we knew that later in 1975, the Taiwan Political Review people were suppressed. But when I came again in 1977, at that time I had made contact with the Human Rights Organization, basically with Lynn Miles,
right.
who was doing this surreptitiously. And I became part of Lynn Miles' network that was really doing human rights work. And then I was more set up with my research project. But probably I really spent more time with the human rights work and then with the political movement than I did with my field work. But I did finish my field work also from 77 to 79. So when I came back in 1977, I was really plugged into everything very quickly.
Yeah, can you talk more about Lynn Miles' work?
Yes, so I'm very happy to talk about that. But the funny thing is, as Lynn Miles told me later, he said he introduced me to everybody that was in the connection in Japan and then in Taiwan. But he said at that time, I said, well, I don't have time to do this. I'm really wedded to my academic degree and my academic work.
Right.
So then he was surprised to start receiving reports from me. This is pretty funny because I told him at the time is I don't have time or I'm not going to do it. But I think the combination of being with Chenju very soon after I came back, so I came back in May of 1977, and seeing that there were really so many new dissidents in Taiwan, even after they'd been through one phase of suppression, there were still a lot of people bubbling up, doing things. And then also the conditions of the factory workers probably was the deciding element that I felt. There are some real social issues here. It's not just political dissent. Freedom of speech is meaningful to people who are not able to complain about their work conditions. There's a whole social, economic, and obviously economic inequality between the KMT controlling all the resources and the ordinary people who are kept under with martial law. But I'd have to say from when I came back in 1977 May and on, it really became pretty much of a roller coaster. And the reason for that was that part of the aspect of it was that in November of 1977, there was the Zhongli Incident, this riot when the populace burned down a police station in a protest against the government stuffing the ballot box. I was there. Yeah, it turned out I was there. I mean, we knew something was going to happen there, because Xu Xingliang had left the KMT, was challenging the KMT. This guy is not a good speaker, but he's quite a strategist.
Okay.
So he told the populace, if you want me to be elected, you have to watch the ballot boxes. And so that's how it came that the ballot boxes were being stuffed and people protested, and then a principal was taken to the police station. The police station was surrounded. This is in Zhongli. This is amazing to think that this is happening under martial law.
Right.
And the police fired a tear gas canister, and it killed a person.
Oh.
This is what I didn't know then. I knew later. I was in the crowd. I was watching.
Oh, my goodness.
But I was watching when the police station went up in flames.
Wow.
And then I went back the next day and took pictures. And I sent those negatives, undeveloped, I sent them to Lynn Miles.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't get to see them until 30 years later.
Wow.
I took some very good pictures, but other black and white pictures were being disseminated. From this incident, the police knew I was there, and I had also made an immediate telephone report to human rights organizations and to news organizations from a public telephone that was right around the corner from the police station.
Yes.
Of course, all the phones were tapped. As a result of my being there and making the report, aside from my other human rights reporting that the police had become somewhat aware of, I was kicked out of National Taiwan University, where my visa was
attached
hung
to
there,
that,
And so I fortunately had until the end of the year when my current visa would expire, but I was pretty much on the spot, right? I got to marry somebody.
Oh, right, to be able to stay,
Yeah, to be able to stay, And I had a little inspiration on that because at that time there was a French girl who had done that. She had gotten pregnant by some Taiwanese who came to France, and then she ran back to Taiwan to make him marry her. And I was pretty much on the spot. And Sanju told me, okay, we have this political prisoner who's mid-30s, and he got out of jail last year and is working in the elections. And his political name is Xu Yiwen. Means not worth a dime. We're not just worth one thread. That's what it means, the name, right?
Oh.
And however, I had to go through a lot of other connections to find out who this person was. And that would read not quite a detective story, but I had to go through a lot of other foreigners who knew him.
Oh.
And I found him. And at the same time, he knew my general situation, that I was going to get kicked out of the country.
Right.
And so we made a deal.
Okay.
Funny thing. The colorful thing, he says, I'm not just a stud pig. So I won't give you all the details of that.
Okay.
But that's because actually what I was proposing, I really missed my son in the U.S., that I'd left my son. And so I was actually planning to get pregnant.
Oh.
And then he said, well, I'm not just a stud pig.
Oh, okay. That's why he said that. Right. Okay.
That's the funny part. And the funny thing is, of course, we didn't really match. This guy's tall and thin, and he's got really dark skin, but he's got beautiful white teeth. If he smiles, he doesn't smile much, but he's a serious guy, talks well. And I'm this kind of plump, shorter person. But I always thought he has such beautiful teeth. And it wasn't too long before I found out all his teeth were fake.
Oh.
Because, he'd had his teeth, some of them knocked out in prison, and then the others got infected. So yeah, fake teeth. But anyway, he wore his teeth all the time.
Yeah.
Except we had one TV interview, and he took out his teeth one time on a TV interview to show what happens to people in jail.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Well, that's rather colorful. So I think you know him.
Yes,
he just died last week, actually. Shimingda. But what I really didn't know is I had a little bit of a sense of it, but I didn't have so much of an understanding that he was a man on fire. He had been just out of jail in the year before, and he had originally been under death sentence and then commuted to life sentence, and had actually served 15 years in jail, much of it in solitaire. And he was really a man on fire to challenge the regime. And in a way that I think most of the other middle-class intellectuals could not dream of. And in some other ways, you wouldn't be surprised that he was rather, I can't quite say depressed, but he had a strange atmosphere that he was resigned to. He expected to die.
Yeah, he didn't think that he was going to last that long.
He didn't think he was going to last that long. Yeah, that's part of his being on fire because...
he thought his Days are numbered, yeah.
Yeah, his days were numbered, that
Yeah.
he would go back to jail, that he would be killed, that he would die by execution or by what we call accident, by assassination.
Right.
I think I did meet one or two other political prisoners, former political prisoners like that, or who had some of that spirit. But most people get pretty broken. Most people are pretty much broken by the time they've been in jail.
Yeah,
for
15 years.
Yeah, he was 15 years. But I think the big difference, I think that what I came to understand a little bit later is that there were a lot of, probably 90% of the people in the political prisons were people who got there by accident.
Yeah, that's different than if you're doing something willfully, yeah.
So I think in his case, I think he was pretty much a willful and intentional dissident, a revolutionary from the age of 17 or so, 17 or 18, or his mind was already forming and he went into the military with the intent of learning military tactics. And the way he ran the democratic movement was like a military operation, you know, with plan A, plan B, plan C, and immense secrecy. So you couldn't really get a straight answer out of him on anything, which was, of course, a struggle between us quite often, especially like the fact that he was still seeing his previous American girlfriend.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, he was hedging his bets.
Yeah.
He was hedging his bets. There were lots of other possibilities. But he said, I guess he said at one time the reason he had American girlfriends and probably would hope, if possible, to marry one was, of course, for his safety. But he said he would never visit the tragedy of being married to a political prisoner on a local woman who couldn't escape. So his part of his point was that, well, you know, as a foreigner, you can leave. You can leave,
see.
you can escape. You're not chained here the way a local wife would be.
I see.
And also the foreigners were never that serious, right?
When you said the protection, you didn't mean that it would afford him some kind of protection?
No, that's right. That's the point. It would give him protection.
And he would be protected
it did.
too.
It,
Okay.
I would say,
Yeah.
yes, it did. It probably kept him out of jail for about a year and a half.
Oh, okay.
They came for him 2 times before. And I think we got through 2 previous attempts, ruses, 2 or 3, to try to arrest him. So when he got arrested after the Kaohsiung Incident, that was expected.
Yeah, can we talk about the Kaohsiung Incident, or are we caught up
Yes.
yet? Yeah.
Well, we probably have to move up with this a little bit. So, but just to say, so the next election, after the Zhongli Incident, in which the crowd burned down the police station, that was already a kind of watershed in itself, in that the opposition figured that the government would not dare to keep stuffing the ballot boxes. Yeah, the situations had changed a little bit. And it was not the first time. There had previously, in 1975, almost been a riot over the elections, but people didn't dare to press it. The opposition didn't dare to press it. But after 1977, that riot, when Jiang Jingguo did not crack down, he let people be elected. So basically, as a result of that riot, about 5 opposition people got into the provincial assembly. And then these people were more of a base for the further development. And then the occasion of, so this gets really colorful, right?
Yeah.
This does get really colorful. Chen Ju was arrested briefly. We made an international appeal for her. Harvey Feldman, who was the former U.S. ambassador at that time, was at the Taiwan desk in the State Department. And he knew Liu Shoulian, Annette Lu, the founder of the women's movement. He knew Chen Ju, who was arrested, who was very young, but she was the gadfly that emerged when her boss went overseas. And as we heard later, we didn't really know at that time, is he just quietly shelved the KMT's plans for buying fighter jets. It was on his desk for approval, and he just let it sit there until she was released. I don't know how he let them know that, but I guess through various channels. Usually when somebody's arrested and taken away, you're not going to see them for another 10 years. When they're going to be sentenced, and then all their friends are going to be intimidated. And Shimingda was very gutsy. So he probably would have been arrested the same time, but he took off. He escaped, and we got married. So he escaped, and she was arrested. He told me to start telephoning all of our friends and her friends.
Can you talk a little bit more about the circumstances under which, like, Chinshu got arrested?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
They didn't really have specific charges against her, but the end of the year was, elections were supposed to be held in December of 78.
Right.
And she was smuggling a lot of human rights information, together with my help also. And we don't exactly know what precipitated them going after her. In fact, even my marriage to Sherminda might have precipitated it, because it was more like the other way. We heard that people were going to be arrested on June 15th, and Sherminda and I ran straight to the U.S. Embassy and signed a document. Okay, so basically, and then he took off and hid. And then her house was raided that night, and she took off, but she was arrested a week later. So there's lots of things. We don't quite know what the security agencies are thinking, when they arrest people. But she certainly was smuggling information. I was smuggling information. And the opposition was beginning to rev up for the end of the year election. But the fact that she was released, okay.
How long was she?
She was held for 2.5 months, about 2 months. But they made a show of like taking her on a tour of government development projects. And she went on TV, and actually saw her on TV recanting. She had to go on TV and recant and say, oh, yeah, I misunderstood government intentions. The government is really benevolent.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, it was, I was cringing. I was cringing to watch it. But they did release her. It was a huge chill. And the fact that before she was released, or right when she was arrested, I had telephoned all over to her friends. This is like putting people on record that you are her friend. So,
they must have been... Like, did people even want to talk to you? I mean,
no, they didn't. They didn't. What I was doing was what Sherminda asked me to do. Okay, I did some things on my own, but a lot of what I did was that he asked me to do. So he figured I'm not going to get arrested. Okay, but we basically were putting people on the spot. We were putting people on the spot to say, you've got to stand up for her. She's jailed.
Right.
And a few people did send things to her at prison. I went to the market and I got this very pretty blue nightgown, like long nightgown, that she wore at our wedding.
Oh.
Yes, it was very beautiful. She wore it like an evening dress, but it was a nightgown that we had sent her when she was in prison. So, I mean, that really had meaning, right? What she wore then, and the fact that we delivered it to the prison. Because, okay, so telephoning all these people was putting them on the record of all the telephone eavesdroppers that they were friends of Tsunju. And they were cringing that anybody who's friend of somebody who's going to be charged with sedition may be next. So right after that, Sherminda and I were treated like we had leprosy.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah, you can imagine. We'd print it up.
They're so afraid.
And then Tsunju got out of prison and said, when she was released and we finally saw her, she said, okay, you guys have got to have a wedding party to rev off the election season. I printed up cards. Nobody dared to distribute them. I just were just handing them out. You know, can you hand them out? They didn't get handed out.
Yeah.
People were afraid to handle them. Yeah, and we also had the cards printed out, which later became the colors of the Formosa magazine, red, yellow, and green, to look different from the KMT. And it was a green Taiwan superimposed on a yellow U.S. and then with a red background. Yeah, but it was a very scary, as you can see, that was the scary period that nobody could break through to protest. And I do have to credit Sherminda with pushing.
Yes.
With pushing through. Yeah. But I was his tool in a lot of this.
Sure, yes.
Maybe that he could say, well, it's his wife that did it, not him, right? But he was obviously the person who he was very likely going to be taken away at that time. That's in 1978. Yeah, I don't know if I'm getting into too much detail.
No, that's fine. No, I find it's interesting to know the background.
But the details on some of these events give you the sense of the terror.
Of what the people's reactions and how they just didn't want to be implicated, and they're just so afraid of what's going to happen. Well,
very real consequences. So I got thrown out of my house.
Yeah.
I got thrown out of my old Japanese house, and you find out that the gardener is a spy.
Oh, right.
And then you find out that all these other people who are offering to be helpful are spies.
Yeah, they're passing information about you. And maybe even people, your landlord, even if they weren't spying or whatever, maybe they'd just be afraid to have
Well,
you
no, of course,
be
that's right. I mean,
associated,
so
too.
the police only have to say, don't rent to this person, and they kick you out. And I lost all my jobs. Fortunately, I had, some money still from my research funding from Rockefeller Ford. But the same thing, you couldn't keep any kind of security. People would treat you like you had leprosy.
How do you get through that, Linda? So what did you do?
It was pretty terrifying. It was
Yeah.
pretty terrifying. But as I say of myself at that time, what Taiwanese would say, I was too stupid to know. I was
Sure.
too stupid to be afraid. There's a Taiwanese phrase, but I can't pronounce it.
Yeah.
很大胆. It's like, like I thought there couldn't possibly be that many spies around. Why are people so afraid? Why can't they say what they think?
Yeah.
I thought, so what? Isn't this free China? They can't possibly have that much surveillance.
Yeah, right.
And then you gradually find out they do. They do have such a huge amount of surveillance, and as soon as you're identified. Okay, and then later on I found out I had gotten together a little cell of other foreigners to work with me on this. Some came from Lynn Miles, and some I found by myself. So we had a little cell. And we had a division of labor that one person would collect money from that came from Lynn Miles. Another person would pass the documents. And then I was more on the front line doing the interviewing of political prisoners. We had huge numbers of political prisoners coming over to visit our house at that time, Shirmingda. And we were followed by big guys in trench coats who would sit down. When you sat down in a restaurant and you turn around, you see a big guy in a trench coat, and then he'd say, "Oh, by the way, I'm from police office nearby." Then they wanted you to know.
Yes.
They wanted you to know that these big guys in trench coats who are following you speak English, they're listening to you, and they are authorities, but they would do it in quirky kinds of ways. Yeah, no, that's all part of the terrorization process.
Yes.
And then I did learn from one of these guys that, I think it was one of these guys, that they had a list of 200 foreigners with their pictures, and all of the police had to memorize these names and pictures so they could recognize where the foreigners were going around Taipei. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so that's an example of the kind of thing.
Yeah.
Of course, the foreigners were an important element because people who had been in prison would suspect anybody or their families. It's not just them in prison. If the government had arrested people in the past, they did not want the information to get out. They would threaten the families that under the books, the property of seditionists can be confiscated.
Oh.
So if you're the wife, you better shut up or we're going to take away your house.
Oh.
Okay, you and your children are going to be out in the street. And even collecting the human rights information of who was arrested when, under what conditions, was very tricky. And I was going around collecting information, if I could. And you'd find it from all kinds of unusual places, but usually introductions.
But so at that time, did you consider what it would mean to the relatives of those?
Of course. So most of them didn't dare to talk, but they would talk more to a foreigner because they think the likeliness of a foreigner being a plant is less.
Right.
Okay, and also the foreigner can just leave the country.
Yeah.
That's more the thing, that the foreigner is under less danger. The foreigner is not likely going to squeal, but local people are more subject to coercion. Yeah, that's a lot of it. But there were some foreigners who were also being coerced, and some cases in which my letters, which I'd given to a reporter to take out of the country, ended up in the hands of the police.
Wow.
Yeah, that did happen. My private letters ended up in the hands of the police, and they even published them in newspapers and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah, that happened later. Yeah, so it's I'm giving you a pretty good picture of this, right? Yeah, so they basically wanted you to know that you were under surveillance. You're under surveillance.
Yes.
They want you to know it, and they want you to be afraid.
Yeah.
And they have many ways to make you afraid. They killed my dogs, for example.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
so this
my
one thing,
goodness.
they poisoned my dogs with nerve poison.
Oh.
And when they killed, that was after we had to move once. That's another big story. I could say it's a cute story, but it's not really cute because the dogs died.
That's terrible.
And they were not killed with intestinal medicine. They were killed with time-release nerve poison.
Oh, my goodness.
And so Sharminda said, well, they're just telling us they can kill us if they want.
So you just came and you found your dogs? Or
No, it's not that. We were at home. I used to pick up dogs off the street. I had two dogs at that time. One was a little heavier and one was a little lighter.
Right.
And I'm trying to think, this was in August of 1979, or maybe July of 1979. And about 8 p.m., this old mainlander came trying to tell us to buy the Youth Warrior newspaper, which is totally ridiculous, right? We knew he was an agent. He knocked on the door. But when he was knocking on the door, we heard the dogs rushing around. So evidently he was feeding the poison to the dogs through the crack in the door, through the crack in the door. And then we went to the door and opened, and he said he's from the Youth Warrior newspaper.
Right.
So we know, he's some kind of an agent.
Right.
But he didn't know what happened to the dogs. Well, that was like 8 p.m. And one dog was in the house, and the other dog was out in the concrete enclosure outside. And the dog inside the house was smaller, and at 2 a.m., her name was Cream, she started screaming. She started screaming, and she screamed for about 20 minutes, and she died on the sofa. And I didn't dare touch her because her jaws were clamping, like spasming. And then into about 15 minutes later, the dog outside, Trouble, I think their name was Trouble, he started screaming and went into spasms and died. Okay, so, according to the one that was a little heavier died a little later. Yeah, but it's 8 o'clock
disturbing.
to 2 a.m., 6 hours.
That's really disturbing.
Yeah, it's disturbing. So it was obvious that they could kill you if they wanted to. And you would, however the poison would be delivered, you wouldn't know it when you ate it.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that is pretty disturbing.
Yeah.
So to make a little lighthearted, okay, Cream had chewed up a Taiwanese farmer's hat of another one of our friends who was also later on trial at the Kaohsiung Incident. The Presbyterian minister, Li Hongshen, he came back, he was very proud. He got a Taiwan farmer's hat, like we're real local looking.
Yeah.
And when they were at my house, the dog chewed it up. And so we wrote, Democracy Warrior on the hat. And we took the two dogs' bodies. And at that time, we were living next to the Taiwan Garrison Command prison.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we were living next to the Taiwan Garrison Command prison, so that the family members, when they came to visit their democracy warriors, and we figured they can yowl and haunt the prison.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, that's a little fanciful color.
Yeah.
I guess that's the best we could make of it.
Yeah.
With my dogs being poisoned.
Yeah. Okay, so we were leading up to the Kaohsiung incident and why that was such a watershed moment for Taiwan's democracy.
Okay, well, so the dogs getting poisoned is just one little episode along the way, but there were people being arrested all the time. We had continually campaigning for people arrested, and we didn't really get into the political parts of it, but I hope some of your audience knows this, that the year-end election was canceled when Carter announced that the U.S. would recognize the PRC. So I believe that was December 16th, 1978, when it was announced. And the election season had just been kicked off. And the opposition had been doing the informal party. The campaign coalition was really, just drawing huge crowds. And we had figured out a way to get around the government's regulations that you could not travel between areas, between election districts. So we really had unified the whole island like a party. And it was going like a house on fire. And then the next week, the election was canceled. And then the whole military establishment revved up this huge public opinion uproar that anybody who criticizes the government is pro-communist, is seditious. I think at that time, really, the security agencies wanted to arrest the whole opposition, we heard later. But the government was in a very tricky situation because Carter had already announced human rights policies. Carter had cut off military and economic aid to some of the Central American, especially the Central American governments that were accused of human rights abuses, plus Haiti and some other things. There was a lot of bad press against the KMT in the U.S. then. Of course, the human rights issues, even the issues from the Chinese Civil War.
Right.
And so I think the government was in a very tricky situation, not knowing how the U.S. would respond to a crackdown in Taiwan. And the Taiwanese overseas at that point were already very mobilized. And they'd been very mobilized due to the Voice of Taiwan, which by November of 1978, we were directly in contact with the Taiwanese supporters overseas. So I think that was part of the reason that the democratic movement was able to pick up again and keep going. So Shimingde put out, of course, he was doing all this, not himself alone. They had a group of 5
Right. So you're
leadership
meaning
of
the
5.
overseas support was instrumental to...
The overseas support, I think, was quite instrumental. In Taiwan, we could not see it directly. I couldn't see it directly.
Yes.
But looking back and knowing later, being overseas, I didn't even know at that time. You know, the Voice of Taiwan people were calling me, but I didn't know. And then they started calling other people. But first it was just me.
Okay.
Because other people were afraid to be recorded.
They were trying to tell you that there's overseas support, or what were they trying to reach you about?
We were always reporting to them what was happening in Taiwan.
Yes.
Right. So from the time of the formation of the campaign coalition, when they first telephoned, and the funny thing is they first telephoned my house because the campaign coalition office didn't have a telephone at first. So the number that was published was my home phone.
Oh, wow.
So it was Eileen Chang, Zhang Yi in Flushing, who telephoned me, and I was, like out of the blue.
Right.
We were not able to telephone overseas.
I see. But you could receive calls.
We could receive calls, but we could not call out.
Okay.
Okay, and for one reason money, but the other big reason, just the way the phone system worked.
Okay.
We couldn't make international telephone calls, but they could call us.
Okay.
So we always waited for them to call us. And then,
But if your phone was being tapped, they could hear.
of course, their phones, especially the international phones, totally tapped, and local phones also.
Right.
But of course, directly. We know it's always being tapped. That's why I was the voice, because even Shimingda, any small incident in which he was sentenced for any small incidents, he would be sent back to life imprisonment. So, I mean, I knew very well I was operating as the voice of other people, as reporting on what was happening in Taiwan. And I think it wasn't until about 3 or 4 months later that people like Liu Xiulian went on the line and talked, which later she did, but it was quite a while. Mostly people would tell me, I would collect all the information about what's happening and then tell the Voice of Taiwan. I was also always making up reports for the reporters. When the campaign coalition was formed, then the international news started paying attention to us and would visit us quite often. And then we had academic figures like Victor Lee from Stanford University Law School visiting us. People recognize that this is an organization that's really...
So the campaign coalition was calling for the elections, like the opposition?
It was organizing the opposition.
Right.
It had really set up an organization that was island-wide. Technically in violation of the election laws, but we had some ways to get around it because of the labor candidate, my good friend, the labor candidate, Yang Jin-soo. And it was really taking off. There was an underground newspaper, Tide, Cao Liu, which we didn't run directly. It was run by Chen Wenzhen. And then there were other people writing books and selling books. It's kind of funny, like when it starts rolling, it's like people are coming out of the woodwork.
Yes.
You just don't know where they're coming from. And there's a kind of a coordination, but it's almost moving too fast.
Yeah, how do you keep track? Yeah.
Well, we really couldn't keep track. We could just be one of the conduits of information. But it was like the major conduit of information because Shimingda was the general secretary of the campaign coalition. And then other opposition people, which were in consultation with him, but they were busy being provincial assemblymen or the legislature. So they weren't doing the day-to-day operations. He was doing the day-to-day operations. And then I was doing the day-to-day news coordinate with foreign news, not local news, but foreign news. I would write up briefs for them.
Wow.
At that time, we were just beginning to have copy machines.
Oh,
Usually I had to do with carbon paper, but we were finally starting to get some copy machines.
Wow.
That's why they could do the underground newspaper. Because copy machines had just become available.
Okay.
And I could talk more about that, but that was just all coming out of the woodwork in 1978.
Okay.
And then, although the elections stopped, so Shimingda, he drafted a statement calling for the end of martial law, the withdrawal.
Wow.
Yes, that's the big thing. The end of martial law, withdrawal of security units from schools, military, basically dismantling the security apparatus. Freedom of speech, like 10 big demands. It's like the 10 Commandments. I think there were 10 items.
Wow.
And then he got all the candidates who would dare to sign on to it. That was Christmas Day, 1978. So right after the U.S. announced the breaking in relations. So it was tremendously fearful that everybody who signed was afraid this was the end of the rope. But one of the important figures in the South, he paid for printing huge numbers of it And we were going to distribute this from South Taiwan to North Taiwan at the New Year's time. And he was arrested. That's January 20th, 1979, Yu Dongfa was arrested. And probably Shermingda would have been arrested too, but he wasn't home for 2 days. He was planning this together with Yu Dongfa. Again, a major attempt to stop the developing opposition.
Right.
And then that was the occasion for the famous Chao To March against political arrest, the first such protest since 1947. Everybody expected that this could be their last day of freedom. So I'm saying, however, it seems that the government did not dare to crack down, as certainly the security agency would have liked to, I think because of the Carter human rights policy. And then it just started snowballing even more. So like every 2 weeks we had a demonstration. They would arrest people, a demonstration, they'd release them. We went from 5,000 to 10,000 to
Wow.
like more and more people would gather at a 2 days notice.
Okay.
But we had to have a very clever 2 days notice.
Right.
And then the magazine was formed, Formosa magazine.
Yes.
Shermingda was the general secretary together with Yao Jiawen. And that was, I think it was the end of about June of 1979 that was formed.
Yes.
And then the offices around the whole island were basically the campaign offices.
Okay.
So 12 offices were formed. And it was pretty much a confrontation with security forces every time there was a new office.
Sure.
And the one I usually describe is one where I was, I could really watch it. And so Nantou, is in the middle of the island, right?
Yes.
And the office in Nantou, I'm not quite sure, I think it was September of 1979. And Nantou is pretty isolated, it's like in the middle of this kind of valley that's in the mountains. And I counted 100 military vehicles as we were driving into the town.
Oh, wow.
So they'd been there. We went early. Yeah, and the whole streets, the whole way, they were all lined with jeeps, personnel carriers. The whole place was, it was hundreds of military vehicles. And when we started our meeting, the military started driving tanks around the block.
Oh, my goodness.
I don't know how many tanks. It was at least 3 or 4 tanks. They were driving around the block.
Well, that was a
meeting.
clear show, yeah.
Yeah, a pretty clear show of force, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you have 4 tanks driving around the block. The whole place is vibrating, like, of course, the noise.
Yeah.
But it's vibrating like a low-level earthquake.
Earthquake, sure.
Yeah, for an hour or so, your whole time. You can't hear yourself think, right? So we're moving towards something that's looking like a real physical confrontation.
Yes.
And there are thousands of people descending on the location for a meeting in a theater. The theater held 1,000 people. It was totally full.
Okay.
And that's how I figured out how to count people, because I could figure out the number of seats in the theater.
Yes.
And it was totally full.
Uh-huh.
And some people standing.
Right.
And so then I figured, so this is what 1,000 people looks like. But before when we had to get into the theater and it was blocked off by police,
right.
I don't know. I don't exactly know how these tactics happened.
Yeah.
It's kind of like non-violent tactics,
right.
but with bodies, with physical force. People formed lines, and I don't know if Shermingda was directing it or who.
Oh, okay.
You can't always figure out who's directing it, but we had, how kids play whiplash? Like a row of 12 kids or so, and you have somebody at one end swishing them one way and the other. So basically we had lines of people playing whiplash to push through the police lines.
Oh.
So that you get enough force.
Yes.
Yeah, you get enough force that you can break the police lines.
Oh, gosh.
Right. So this was like September of 79. So it's soft bodies hitting soft bodies, so people are you're not injuring the police.
Right.
But you're pushing through to get into the auditorium. And then after you get a break in the police lines, everybody can push through.
Wow.
But it's getting close to being physical.
A confrontation.
Confrontation, yeah. And the police are arresting people.
The police allowed people to get through that, like by doing that.
Well, yeah, but, like how many police would it take to stop 1,000 people?
Right.
That's the kind of thing.
Yeah,
but they did do incredible efforts. So, for example, we had a meeting of 30 people in the city of Taichung.
Yeah.
Taichung is a pretty big city even then, medium-sized city. They had a police presence with blocks on every intersection in the city.
Oh, wow.
And we just had 2 buses.
Wow.
Okay, and then they let gangsters loose on us.
Oh, my
And they
goodness.
broke the glass in the buses right in front of our faces.
That's so scary.
Yeah, no, it's scary.
Yeah.
And then they used water hoses.
Oh, my goodness.
And everybody got wet with water hoses.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty fat, so I did a good job. I stood in front of the water hoses, and it's fat. I stood in front of the water hoses with my hands cupped.
Oh my goodness!
And the water went back on the water hose people.
Oh, wow!
Yeah, I was pretty good at that.
Wow,
that's
You're so brave.
Well, I'm not sure, but it's kind of like when you're confronted.
Well, you just have to defend. Yeah, defense.
Yeah. When you're confronted with the situation.
Yeah.
Now we think, oh, it's great. We were able to great to some degree, but everybody got wet. There were a few people who were like, I think one person passed out because like sudden cold. That was in wintertime.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
But it wasn't very cold. It was medium.
Sure.
So that's the kind of situation that
was building. Sure.
is building. The opposition was facing,
right.
Holding meetings, holding rallies, and yet it was still building.
Right.
So I'm giving you the sense of what was happening before the Kaohsiung Incident, and then the whole scale of it all was getting bigger and bigger.
I've been speaking with Linda Gail Arrigo, Linda, about the era and events that precipitated the Kaohsiung Incident. Now it's time for you to show us some love. Rate us on Spotify, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Audible, leave us a review there. It helps others to discover Talking Taiwan. To learn more about any of the items mentioned in this episode, visit our website, talkingtaiwan.com. There we'll list any related links. Thank you for listening to another episode of Talking Taiwan. I'm your host, Felicia Lin.
Talking Taiwan is brought to you by Formosa.com.